Awesome. Good afternoon, everyone. This is Audrey Russo, President and CEO of the Pittsburgh Tech Council. It's a great Tuesday. I'm very excited to introduce our guest today, Aaron Morris, which I'll formally introduce in a moment. But before we get started, I want to give deep appreciation to Huntington Bank and the support that they've had for us over almost a year, which is sort of crazy. We thought we'd do this for a month, and here we are a year later, still trying to keep the community tethered and to make sure that we are shining the spotlight on all things innovation and tech. And today is no different. And Jonathan Kirsting is here with us, and he is Vice President of all things marketing and media, tells a lot of stories, and you may hear him in podcasts and radio and so many things in this region in terms of telling stories. He's been doing that actually for over 2 decades. So always impressed to hang out with him and to get the context for how much has changed in Pittsburgh. So we also have 40 by 80, who's a sponsor, and that is the wholly owned subsidiary of the Pittsburgh Technology Council. That's the longitude and latitude of Pittsburgh. And we are focusing on workforce development and entrepreneurship. And you're going to hear a little bit in a few months about our work in entrepreneurship that we're very, very excited about. So stay tuned for that. You can go to our website and all social media and see some of the things that we're talking about. So it is very thrilling to me. Oh, and I also want to remind you, this is not a chance for you to sell your wares. This is only a chance for you to listen to our guest. And if you have questions, they're in the chat and they're directed towards the topic at hand. So I want to thank you for that. We always have plenty of other opportunities for you to sell your wares, not today at noon. So I am very thrilled to introduce Aaron Morris. He's CEO and co-founder of Allvision IO. I've known Aaron as long as I've been in this job. And so just in all candor, I consider him a good friend and someone who has been a quiet champion for amazing things in this region and also a quiet entrepreneur in many ways. So I always try to pull him out and try to get his butt in front of people because I think it's pretty damn important for everyone to understand that there are people here who just have their heads down. They have their heads down doing amazing things and aren't always in the spotlight. And Aaron is one of those people, but he's also a truly good egg who has a really big mind and really cares about so many different things and just works hard to solve problems. So that's no BS. I'm saying that as a friend and as a colleague. And, you know, he's also funny. He's also funny, or at least he tries to be. So on that note, I'm going to bring forward Aaron Morris. Thank you. I hope you appreciated that intro.
That was probably the best intro I've had. I'm going to probably record that and play that.
It's already recorded.
Every kind of discussion or panel, I just like, no. I've got a pre-recorded intro that I'm going to play.
Play that to your kids and to your wife. Play that to them.
Yeah, for sure. Absolutely.
So it's great for you to be here. And listen, you know, we had an announcement that was made this morning and, you know, so many different things going on. But before we jump into all of that stuff, I really just want to set the stage and talk about you, Aaron. Who is Aaron? Who is Aaron? Okay.
That's a big question. There's a lot of angles to that.
Well, let's just start. Like, you born and raised in Pittsburgh? Nope.
No. So, all right, if we're going back that far, so I'm a West Virginian. It's so funny. I ran into another West Virginian last week, which is rare in the pandemic world, and we geeked out over like Tudor's biscuit. Like, that's just a thing. Yeah, if you're from West Virginia, like, you get it. You, like, anybody in the audience who's from West Virginia will understand that. But yeah, I grew up there, had very ambitious, loved technology, did really well in undergrad, and came to CMU for grad school. Because like robotics was the future, right? Which I think it's continuously the future. We're starting to live some of it now, but came to CMU for grad school, did my master's and PhD there. I worked under Red Whitaker. So those in robotics in Pittsburgh probably know that name. And I was there for essentially the rise of the autonomous car. So in fact, I was part of for a very short period of time the Red team, which was the very first Yeah, so it's funny because I've been very deep in it, but like indirectly. I've avoided, actually, not for any reason, but just not been in part of any self-driving initiative, always on the side of it. But when I graduated, I spent a little bit of time just kind of learning I was very technical, had a PhD, but really was excited by the business aspect of it. In fact, I had a little side business going while I did my PhD, which got me like, oh, I'm going to be an entrepreneur. That's
what was the side business again? I forget. What was that?
It was called Workhorse Technologies. I had developed a little scanning device that you could drop down a hole and it digitize a space. And then we had some mobile robots. And so I've been like, digitizing the world for a long time. But I loved, I remember like just that first kind of deployment with a real customer. It was like addiction. Like I could not stop that feeling. So I keep trying to get that hit, right? So anyway, coming out of the PhD, I realized like I needed a little bit more kind of exposure to the business side. I joined Seegrid in their early days. I was there for about a year. They were kind enough to let me join the sales team. It's like a PhD wants to sell like equipment, like okay. But no, it was like a great learning experience. Taking, and at that point there, where they were still kind of customer engagement, figuring out the product, and there were kinks, and so it was a great time to kind of learn how to sell in a kind of early stage product. But then by that point, the little bit of work I had done in self-driving started to kind of pop up, and I had worked with General Motors during when I was at CMU, because they were a sponsor of the Urban Challenge, and just started doing some consulting for them, which formed my first company. And then that turned into a company that's actually not too dissimilar to the one I'm doing now. We were just really early at that time. We started looking at taking scanning technology and assessing infrastructure. Bridges are our big one back in that time period, but roads. But then we, after kind of getting into that and building all this nice software to assess infrastructure, we realized at that point in time there was maybe a dozen vehicles in the world doing this. We're like, oh, that's a very terrible market to be like trying to like grow. So as it turned out, GM also had a group that digitized their buildings, their factories, because factories are always turning over new product lines, new manufacturing, and so they always need a digital representation of the building. So they can plan, where the next, assembly line is going to be going into. So they needed a lot of help, and that led us into kind of a different trajectory, a different business, which was more indoor space, and that ultimately led to the acquisition of Allpoint to Autodesk.
Mm-hmm. So that was a short, and tell people that really was a short period of time.
It was
actually in the business. How long was it?
It was very short. I think I started Allpoint in earnest in like 2000, around 2009, and then we were acquired by the end of 2012.
Right.
So yeah.
So is that what you anticipated? Did you? I know
not at all.
Story, but I don't recall that's what you had anticipated.
No, not at all. It's funny because I remember when we started the company and we really wanted to work on product. Mm-hmm. And there's a again, a number of great companies in the area, but they're very project based. It's very kind of engineering services on demand, and we wanted to actually do something that had sort of market impact and could sell at scale. So from the earliest days, we started with the project obviously with General Motors, but then we're looking like what market could this serve? And the engineering survey market seemed to be, it. And so I remember having a conversation with an individual, like at my first conference, just trying to get a feel. And they're like, it's all going to end in CAD. You just accept it. I'm like, what are you talking about, man? I knew nothing. It's like, it's all into CAD. And sure enough, it ended with CAD. And so we ended up, but, at that point in time, end of 2012 into 2013, 3D digitization became very popular. Photogrammetry, like that's when drones started to pop up and people wanted to make 3D models from drones. So it was all the rage. And so we were an acquisition that Autodesk made as part of a couple companies. They rolled into a division that was supposed to be the ingestion pipeline for digital reality. So things that you would capture, and that was going to accelerate the design build process. So we did that. And
you worked for Autodesk for a little while, right?
I worked for them, I think roughly 5 years. And it was a phenomenal experience. That was really, I had never worked sort of in the corporate world at that scale. It always been academia and startup. So it was a little jarring. You go from like running as fast as you can and doing whatever to okay, we've got ways of doing things here, Aaron, slow down. Like it takes 6 months to get a thing approved here. So but there's reasons for it. It's very integrated, very tied. Their business units, their legal department, sales, communicate, like everything is very tightly, and it's a very large company. So you had to do things in a very structured way. But it was great. During my time there, I got to anything that could be captured and digitized, I got to touch. From the physical infrastructure to buildings to products to viruses. They were digitizing just about everything, and we were looking at it all. So really, really fun time. I mean, some of the more cooler ones were in the movies. They would digitize sets. They would digitize trees and landscapes, and they would bring that in to help artists kind of render artificial worlds. So, I mean, all of that was very exciting.
So you tried, they were in Pittsburgh for a while, right?
They were, officially in Pittsburgh. I think they're still, I don't think they have a formal office now. There's still individuals here. Yeah, I mean, what happened, and it was part of why I ended up deciding to depart. It was just kind of a change of the guard. The Carl Bass had been the CEO when I was there. Had stepped out. Andrew Agnos had stepped in, and he was kind of slightly different in where he was wanting to focus. And that focus wasn't necessarily in the sort of the area that we were in. And so their strategy was then to sort of invest in the areas that were kind of core to, it was very much around the construction market. It still very much is. Mm-hmm. And so Pittsburgh really didn't have a big presence in that area. So they either relocated or they just let some individuals have offices here. But for me, that was a huge win because at that time, and again, it wasn't that. I mean, again, phenomenal company, phenomenal direction, and like I suspect, reality capture, which was the group we were seeing, would come back. But it was the autonomous vehicle that kind of brought me back out. Because again, I had started when there were like a dozen vehicles with scanners on top of them running around. Right. And now there were like hundreds and soon to be thousands and many, many more. So it was that idea that finally, we can enter a world where there's going to be a lot of very, very rich data to mine. That kind of like this is the time to really try what we were trying originally at All Point.
Well, okay, so we're going to end at All Point. You have the acquisition. I just want everyone to understand that a quick acquisition that Aaron had with All Point is number one, very unusual, but B, you really tried to work hard to create the Pittsburgh importance to the new company.
Oh yeah.
That's something that I think people don't often hear. They don't often hear the whole story in terms of an exit and trying to keep the presence here in Pittsburgh. And that was one of the things that you tried to do. I mean,
yeah, that was absolutely a requirement. I mean, it was a make or break for us. In fact, like, because like, again, not going to, but we had a few different options on the table. And they were definitely one of the most interesting. But that was the thing was, you know, we had a phenomenal team here. We had access to, you know, resources of Pittsburgh. We had a lot of support. I had CMU. There was really, like, if you're going to do this, this is the place to do it. And, you know, if they wanted this level of performance and to relocate it somewhere else, it wasn't going to happen.
Right.
And they agreed wholeheartedly with that.
Yeah, I want to just to give that as a plug and to remind people that so many entrepreneurs really do that. So now let's go to, let's talk about this new company. Let's talk about this company that you started when you started it. And you also have an announcement that just was released. So let's talk about all of that.
So again, it kind of, not to say, it's definitely not like 2.0, but it's very much kind of like, you know, some ideas are just a tad bit early when you have them. And, you know, at all point, you know, we had a vision of a digital world, a digital infrastructure. And again, there wasn't enough sensing technology out in there to really make it viable. And so when the autonomous vehicle started to come up, like, this is it, this is the moment. So we started Allvision around that idea, which was like, there's a digital world coming. In fact, like, I get very excited, like, anytime we talk about smart cities, anytime we talk about 5G, like, these, if you really think about it, these things, like, can't exist without a digital representation. I mean, even autonomous vehicles, right? They're built upon a digital representation of the road. And so, to me, what we are about is kind of that foundational level of a future, right? We can always go back. We can stick poles wherever we want. We can put signs on them. We can, fix potholes, willy-nilly. But, if we're going toward this future of connected, easily accessible, easy to understand, there is a digital representation that has to be. You cannot have it. I mean, think about, one of the things I like to think about is, I mean, look at a company like Uber. Like, that existed because there was a map, a digital map and an API that allowed you to, say, here, I'm here, you're there, route me. Like, all of that had to be in place for, a huge company like that to exist. And so it's the same, I feel, here. But, again, there's a level of detail and complexity which current maps don't provide. And so we set out to create that digital representation. We partner, we ourselves do not do data collection. Well, on a scale, we will, if need be, primarily for demonstration, but we partner with those who have data sources. And it's usually a particular type of data source. It usually involves LiDAR and imagery. We work with them, and then we find consumers of some derivative of that information. So, for example, City of Pittsburgh, we've done projects like curb occupancy. So when they were kind of redesigning the Strip district and they were trying to figure out where bike lanes need to go, they were getting a lot of pushback saying, well, you can't take away parking because it's crazy there. So we were able to quantify that. We did things like the inventorying of streetlights, and that was really interesting because when we were first engaged with the city, well, can you tell us where their streetlights are? Because if you walk by a streetlight, you can see an asset tag. It's it's there. And they're like, yeah, we have an Excel spreadsheet, and it says maybe it's somewhere on Forbes. Maybe. So oh, okay. And, things like streetlights are important because those are assets that, small cells go on for 5G. So
Right.
Now, again, we're living in a world where you have to know where stuff is, and we're building it. And so into our announcement, we're always looking for data sources. And so we've been, over the years, kind of building up a repository large enough to kind of have a nationwide impact. And today we've now signed several partnerships up, but the last one we just closed one with is with Tomtom.
Mm-hmm.
So we now have access to over 1 million miles worth of highway data, and it's all fairly new. So anything you could possibly want on a highway to know about, like, again, these are typically, customers there probably fall more in the DOT space, but we've had conversations with groups interested in billboards and other kind of advertisement. But primarily, like, looking at, where are the location of barriers and guardrails and stoplight or just traffic signs and so forth. So very large data set, and now we can make it accessible to anybody.
And so that's with Tomtom, right? That's why the partnership, and when does it start, or did it already start?
It's already started. Yeah. So again, we're about data sourcing. And again, we've got a number of partnerships, but they've been able to provide a pretty substantial data set for us, and it gives us access, and pretty much any of our customers access now to a nationwide coverage of this really rich, high definition data that we can provide, or we can mine for particular information as well. So
what about any other partnerships? Do you have any other partnerships that you can talk about?
Sure. Like, probably not as name brand as that, but we work with a number of engineering firms. There's a group in the Midwest named Trek that supply us sort of information that they collect as part of projects. We work. There's probably a number of other organizations, typically fall in the design engineering firms that sort of local to various cities and organizations that will collect data and that we're aggregating into sort of our repository as well.
So the pandemic, how has that affected you?
It's been a journey, I would say, on twofold. Like, one is when it first started to come down that like this was happening, mm-hmm. we immediately went virtual. So the office, we held on to the office probably for another month or two, but then ended up kind of letting it go because, with the team that we have, there wasn't really, a specific need to have a dedicated office. So we went virtual. But, and now that we're, closing in or at a year plus of this, we've found ways to make it work, but it's clearly not ideal, right? Mm-hmm. Communication, you start to sort of appreciate the sort of water cooler talk. There's definitely several times in which, like I'm, talking to sort of, a few people on a daily basis, and they're talking to a few people on a daily basis, but I don't interact, directly with everybody every day. And so things can get lost or misinterpreted. So, making sure that communication happens, and really being, specific about it and intentional about it has been like so important. Whereas before it was almost like it was very passive, particularly in, we have an open office concept. So nothing was private, right? Like whatever conversation was happening.
Right. So what's next? What's next? Are you going to have an office?
That's a great question. It's clear that there is value in having an office. Maybe not in the way that we had it before. As a team, we haven't had yet a discussion about returning yet. But I think when the timing is right, we will most certainly have an office. But again, what that looks like, it may not be the same. Everybody come in, all the time. Maybe it's something a little more, ad hoc, more shared, more community based. But we'll see.
So I think I asked Julie's question, but there's another question from Lauren Rosenblatt. Jonathan, you want to grab that for Aaron?
Love to, Aaron. Great to see you. I'm really looking forward to seeing Kit back on the mean streets of Pittsburgh doing its thing. Just saying, that's a whole other story. So Lauren Rosenblatt from the PG wants to know, basically, you mentioned the Tomtom partnership would offer data about highways. Is that the first time you're moving into that space? Do you work with customers all over the country? And what use cases for your technology are the most popular?
Yeah, so those are really good questions. Let me back up. And so the way that we kind of look at our business, we look at it as in terms of three verticals. There is a transportation sort of interstate highway vertical in which this particular data and sort of partnership comes into play. We also have a rail vertical, looking at track and the maintenance of what they call positive train control, PTC assets. Those are assets that essentially help the train know where it's at so that it can operate safely. And then the third vertical is urban, so the digitization of urban core. So coming back to use cases, again, depending on the vertical, the use cases vary a little bit. In the case of the interstate highway that we are, again, kind of really pushing on this partnership, you would be amazed at how frequently assets along a highway or road change. Mm-hmm. There's signage that's pretty important telling you how fast you should be going, when there are exits, what towns you're coming up to. And, storms, particularly now, we're seeing a lot more storms and they're knocking them out. And unless you kind of have eyes on those areas, it's hard to tell, like from a Department of Transportation perspective, what's there. And so those are a lot of the use cases we serve in that vertical. So looking at sort of the critical infrastructure, signage, bridges, guardrails, barriers. There's millions and millions of miles of this stuff out there that all has to be maintained by a comparatively small number of people. And so the way that we can do that is through this data and through sort of our technology, which takes that data, identifies those things, and provides both the location of where it's at and sort of a condition. But again, we also do, on the rail side, it's looking at crossings and signals and switches and things that are very important to the operation of a freight rail or rail organization. And then in urban, urban's obviously an area where I'm always fascinated because there's 1,000,001 use cases for the data. We actually started in parking, had no idea we would be parking. In fact, that's why kind of Kit came into place, is to kind of, help us find parking spots. But, things like in that scenario, things like fire hydrants and parking signs and curb cuts and crosswalks, like all of this zoning, all of this plays an important role, and then all has to be found. And pretty much none of it is any sort of digital format. So it's an exciting time for us to go through. Yeah.
So it should be exciting in terms of the new administration in Washington, D.C., right?
For sure. No, that's another thing I think coming into this year. And we're already feeling the general excitement, just the amount of investment and interest in infrastructure again. And I see, again, just in the past couple of months, just the amount of momentum, the amount of conversation, the amount of new pipeline that's started to come our way. So there's definitely a lot of fertile ground in this space.
So I just have two last questions here. One is, what have you learned differently? What have you learned since AltPoint? Now starting this company.
Wow.
You can only say, just pick the top two things, because I know you'll have a lot to say and I don't want to be disruptive?
Well, it's so one thing I keep reminding myself, not that I've learned, but I've always known. In fact, I always, if you're an entrepreneur or you're working with an entrepreneur and they ever say that they got it all figured out, like that's a red flag, because everything is, again, just when I think I've seen it all or done it all, like you learn something new. Expectations, you just got to be ready for the unknown, be ready to kind of listen to the customer, probably like foremost, because they will tell you where you're right and where you're wrong. And you've just got to be open enough to hear, both sides of it and, take what their feedback and kind of push forward. So I think that's a big one. And, again, this is a first time for working with governments, cities, and that in itself that's been a very different, kind of way of working. But, I feel that, again, we're on the precipice of a new world. And I think I'm seeing a lot of what used to be kind of, this is the way we do it now, looking at towards like, well, this is how we've got to do it in the future. So that's very exciting. And
so are you hiring?
We probably, so right now, we are in the midst of kind of wrapping up, with this announcement and a few other things. We'll probably be hiring in the either latter part of Q2 or Q3.
Okay.
So not right now, but very soon.
Well, listen, our time has run through, and I know we can talk longer, and hopefully I've answered most questions that people have asked. But it is always great. I know there's more things in the hopper for you, and I think that 2021 is probably going to be an inflection year for you, just sitting and knowing as all things converge. People want to know more, they can go to Allvision.io. I think that's the website. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. And then they can find you on LinkedIn if they want to ask you any other questions or be helpful to your business.
Absolutely.
So thank you, Aaron. We're going to stay close to you. I know that you're up to some great stuff. And while to many this might not be sexy, this is really important work. This really is important work. Even just as much as I know about your business, I can't believe every time I listen to you and talk about all the pieces and parts of an urban core, I still miss them all, right? Yeah. I still tend to miss them. So thank you for that. Thank you, Aaron. Thank you for being a West Virginia, Pittsburgh advocate. You certainly have been. You do a lot of things to make sure that Pittsburgh is a special place. So I want to thank you for taking the time with us, and glad you're safe and sound. So what's up for tomorrow, Jonathan?
Marinus Analytics is stopping by. Everyone knows they are the final 3 for the IBM Watson AI Challenge. It's so exciting. Can't wait to learn about the challenge and how they're going to win it. I know they are.
Yeah, that's really cool. All right. Well, thanks, everyone. Stay safe.
Be good.